Welcome to the series on critical thinking skills in science. This is Chapter 3, Worldview and Philosophy, or Worldview Philosophy, session number 3. What we're looking at in this session is we've gone over definitions of worldview and philosophy, and it's kind of like, okay, what is the difference now between worldview and philosophy? What can we, how can we differentiate them? Where do they come from? That's the question we have. So how does the concept of worldview, Weltanschauung, relate to the concept of philosophy? In my studies, I've studied through school, Bible school, and others. Oftentimes the concept of worldview comes up, but I never really studied much about philosophy until I got into the secular system and doing research. I had to build my own philosophy. So in building my philosophy, I came up with that question. Well, what is the difference now between worldview and philosophy? How do they relate? So here's a definition from the Florida State University philosophy department on what is philosophy. How do you define philosophy? How should it be defined? It says, in a broad sense, philosophy is an activity people undertake when they seek to understand fundamental truths about themselves, the world they live in, and their relationships to the world and to each other. That is a definition of philosophy. But that sounds like very similar to the definition of worldview. So what is the difference between the two? How do they relate? Well, this is what I've brought up, and I'll step out for a minute so you can see the two definitions side by side on the board. Is that a worldview is a commitment, a fundamental orientation of the heart about the basic constitution of reality. And that provides the foundation on which we live and move and have our being. That's James Sire. Now, philosophy. In a broad sense, philosophy is an activity people undertake when they seek to understand fundamental truths about themselves, about the world in which they live, and their relationships to the world and to each other. Now, between those two definitions, what do you observe as being the difference between a worldview and a philosophy? And that is now, for me, generated more questions, because it's like, well, wait a minute, they seem to cover the same territory. They seem to want to answer the same fundamental questions. So what then is the difference? Why are there two concepts? And what do they do? Well, we've gone over a little bit about worldview and how it's divided up into three not worldview, but the Welt. The Welt concept, the German concept, actually had three components to it: the Weltbild, and the Weltanschauung, and the Welt model. Well, philosophy has four branches to it. The branches are, number 1, epistemology, number 2, metaphysics, number 3, logic, and number 4, axiology. What I did is I personalized my philosophy, and so I put it in this order, but I broke up epistemology into two components, two sections. Section A, which is the source of reliable knowledge chosen. So what I feel is that for me to go on to metaphysics that defines reality and defines God and defines ultimate or the universal science, the cause and effect, or the cause of all things, I have to have a source. I have to extrapolate those answers from my source. So I start with epistemology A, which is the source of knowledge. What is my source of reliable knowledge? Then I go to metaphysics, and out of my epistemology, or out of my source, then I answer the questions of metaphysics about reality. Then I go on to logic. Well, before I go on to logic, there's B, methods. Epistemology appears again, and it's the methods used to reason by and how to reason. So I would start with epistemology, with A, the source, and then go to metaphysics, and from metaphysics to methods again, to epistemology B, and then on to logic, and on to axiology. So those are the 4 branches, and how I divide up the first branch into 2 separate values. Now here you can see in the house diagram how this fits into just relating to the house. Okay, first we have epistemology, the source, which is number 1. But what you'll notice is that the house has a foundation. The house is sitting on source of reliable knowledge, but there's no culture. There's no other influences under that house. The house is just sitting there by itself because philosophy does not take into account culture, doesn't take into account personal perspectives. So epistemology begins with the source, then it moves up to metaphysics, which is the basic beliefs about reality, about God, about general universal science, and then epistemology B, which is the methods, how we get how we work out our logic. What methods do we employ? And that goes to our logic, and then from our logic is our axiology, our value, what we value. So that would be axiology. So this is a layout of how philosophy would function. Now, how do these function together? Or what is the tie then between worldview and philosophy? In session 2, we defined worldview. Session 3, now we've defined philosophy and the 4 branches of it. So now, how do those 2 relate? And that's what we're going to go over in session 4. So that wraps up session 3. We're Tim and Holly, and you're welcome to communicate with us through these addresses down below here. But this is chapter 3, Worldview Philosophy, session number 3. We're going on to 4 next. Thank you very much.